There are places in this country where the fog never quite lifts. Places where roads buckle in silence, where the trees grow tall not out of joy but out of long-held secrets. Dusk comes earlier there. Dogs bark at nothing. And some people, once they leave, never really leave at all. One of those places is a forgotten bend in the Appalachians called Briar Glen. It's not the kind of town you find on a map unless you're lost or running. Tucked between two ancient ridges and laced with rivers that don't have names anymore, Briar Glen once had a population of 9,300. Today, it's closer to 800. Most of the shops along Main Street are shuttered. The gas station closes at 6. And the only school left standing, Buckhorn Valley Elementary, hasn't had a proper field trip since 1993, not since what the locals call the Hollow Day. They don't talk about it directly. They just refer to it in glances, in pauses, in the way old people turn their heads when they hear tires crunch gravel in the distance. But that day, October 11th, 1993, is burned into the dirt and the memory of this town. That's the day the bus disappeared. Not broke down, not stolen, not hijacked. Disappeared. The weather had been unusually warm for early fall, with a strange humidity that made everything feel damp, like the air itself was sweating. Morning fog had rolled in thick across the roads, and by 6:30 a.m., it had already swallowed most of Route 14, which twisted out of the valley like a snake trying to escape its skin. At Buckhorn Valley Elementary, it was field trip day. The children, 12 in total, were buzzing with that nervous energy only kids can summon. Part joy, part fear, part sugar. They were headed to the Cresswell Caverns, a sprawling underground cave system about 50 miles north, known for its ancient rock formations and native burial sites. It was supposed to be educational, a half-day trip, back before supper. The kids were between the ages of 9 and 11. Most of them came from the same two streets, Pine Holler and Juniper Row. Close-knit, working-class families. People who left keys under rocks and let dogs wander. The kind of town where you didn't lock your doors until something gave you a reason to. The substitute bus driver that morning was a man named Alan Greaves. Not much was known about him. He wasn't local, but he'd filled in a few times before. Middle-aged, polite, wore a black baseball cap, and always kept to himself. Some of the parents later said they didn't like the way he smiled. Too wide, too sudden. But on that particular morning, nobody said a word. The teacher who volunteered to chaperone was Miss Leona Marsh, 43, single, quiet. Taught art. She'd stayed late at the school most nights, painting murals with the children on the hallway walls. She'd even made the trip itinerary by hand, typed it up, printed it, put each one in a plastic sleeve. She was the kind of person people remembered only after they were gone. The bus, number 214, pulled out of the school parking lot at exactly 7:14 a.m. There was no send-off, no waving parents. Just 12 kids, one teacher, and a driver no one really knew. It never arrived at the caves. No calls, no signs. The weather worsened. Rain swept in around 8:30, and by noon, the mountains were wrapped in a storm that drowned radio signals and made even short drives dangerous. When the bus didn't return by 4 p.m., the school called the caves. They had no record of the group arriving. Police were notified. Parents began to panic. By sundown, search teams were already combing the highway, checking ditches, gas stations, bridges. Nothing. No debris. No tire marks. Just an absence so sudden, so complete, that it made the woods feel alive. Over the next few weeks, Briar Glen was flooded with officers, dogs, helicopters, divers. They checked every back road, every ravine, every sinkhole. Nothing. Then, one by one, the searchers left. The headlines shrank. The state chalked it up to vehicular disappearance with environmental complicity, which is government speak for. We have no idea where it went, and we're done looking. The town didn't argue. It just quieted. That's the thing about small towns. When trauma comes, it doesn't explode. It sinks. Into the dirt. Into the walls. Into the way people speak about the weather instead of what they really feel. For years, The disappearance of Bus 214 became a kind of ghost story. Kids dared each other to walk Route 14 at night. Some claimed they heard voices in the fog. Others said the bus never left the woods at all, that it was still out there, looping in circles between the trees, caught in time. Most of that was just talk, but every now and then, someone would report seeing headlights in the forest. Faint, flickering, then gone. And every time, the police would come out, shine their lights into the woods, write a report, and quietly file it under unfounded. Then, 30 years later, something happened. August 17th, 2023. A crew of developers broke ground at the edge of Saddle Creek, a rocky stretch of private land about 8 miles outside Briar Glen, just west of where Route 14 used to pass through before a mudslide buried the old road. They were prepping for a new telecommunications tower, something the state had promised for years but never delivered on. On the second day of digging, one of the machines hit something. It wasn't rock. It wasn't pipe. It was metal, painted yellow beneath 30 years of rust and roots. The workers assumed it was an old septic tank. They were wrong. As they cleared the earth away, slowly and carefully, the shape became obvious. A roof, window frames, tires, letters faintly visible along the side panel. One of the men stepped closer, brushed off the dirt with a gloved hand, and saw it. Briar Glen Unified, number 214. The machine operator stepped back and called it in. The dispatcher's voice crackled once, then twice, before going silent. Within 24 hours, the site was under state lockdown. And within 48, people were asking questions that no one was ready to answer. The excavation stopped the moment they found the first window. At first, the crew stood around the crumpled edge of metal, shovels in hand, unsure whether to call it a discovery or a mistake. No one wanted to be the one to keep digging, not after the operator ran his hand along the twisted glass and said, almost like a question, "Is this a bus?" He was young, barely 24, and had only moved to Briar Glen 3 months earlier. He didn't know the story. He didn't grow up with the whispers. But one of the older contractors did, a man named Heath Wilmer, who'd lived in the hollow since the 70s. Heath saw the number 214 scrawled faintly across the battered rear bumper and turned so pale the others thought he might pass out. "Get back," he muttered, waving his hand like someone swatting smoke. "Call the sheriff. Now." And he walked straight to his truck, locked the door, and sat staring out the windshield, unmoving, until the sirens arrived. Sheriff Mabel Denton was the first on scene. She was 63 and had only taken the badge because nobody else wanted it after Sheriff Hauser passed. Her voice was sharp, her face soft. When she saw the bus half buried in clay and vine, she didn't ask questions. She just removed her hat and whispered, "Dear God." 30 years ago, she'd been a rookie deputy, the one assigned to knock on doors after the kids vanished, delivering not answers, but condolences that weren't ready. She still remembered the look in Della Knox's eyes when she told her that her son, Caleb, was officially considered missing in action. It was the kind of phrase better suited for war. And maybe that's what it had been back then. A war against something no one understood. Something that could take a school bus full of children and leave nothing behind. The first day, they didn't touch it. The entire bus was sealed off. Crime scene tape stretched wide through the trees. Drone footage showed the vehicle partially submerged in a muddy basin. The ground around it warped like it had been burned and then buried. The front tires had sunk in so deep into the soil that they were barely visible. Vines the size of forearms had crawled through the wheel wells and looped around the undercarriage, holding it like a snare. It had been preserved by the earth, not eaten. That's what bothered people the most. It wasn't decay that hid it. It was protection, as if something wanted it to stay untouched. On the second day, the forensic team arrived from Charleston, a small, serious crew led by a woman named Dr. Inez Forel, who'd worked on cold case recoveries for over 20 years. She was calm, methodical, and entirely humorless. She treated the bus like a grave, because that's what it was. But when they opened the emergency exit at the back, what they found inside didn't match what they'd braced for. There were no bones, no clothing fragments, no bags, no human remains of any kind, just silence and rot. The seats had deteriorated into warped, foamless shells. The floor was slick with mildew. A single flashlight, cracked and long dead, lay near the front aisle. But no signs of struggle, no blood, no graffiti, as if the kids had vanished in the middle of sitting still. Forel took over a dozen samples, scraping bits of sediment and fibrous growth from the seat frames and window edges. Her notes were clinical, detached. But on her voice recorder, at timestamp 1822, she made a quiet observation she didn't include in the final report. This doesn't feel like a bus that crashed. It feels like a bus that was placed. The town was already stirring by then. Word traveled fast in Briar Glen, faster than the official statements could keep up. People began showing up at the edges of the caution tape, whispering prayers, some bringing old photographs. Sheriff Denton tried to keep the press at bay, but it didn't matter. The story was out. Missing bus from 1993 found buried in remote woods. No remains discovered. The headlines spread like fire. National news trucks rolled in before the week was out. Most reporters camped out in folding chairs, staring at the wreckage through long lenses, waiting for bodies that wouldn't appear. But one man wasn't there to report. He was there because he'd been waiting 30 years. His name was Elias Monroe. He was 56 now, but in 1993, he'd been the assistant principal at Buckhorn Valley. He'd been the one who signed off on the field trip. He'd handed the clipboard to Miss Marsh that morning. He'd waved to the kids as the bus pulled away. And when it never came back, it destroyed something in him. Elias never married, never left Briar Glen. He'd taken a job at the library, grown quiet, grown strange. But when the news broke, he showed up at the excavation site with a worn notebook in his hand and tears already on his cheeks. "I knew they were still out here," he said to no one in particular. "I knew it. I just didn't think we'd find the shell." One of the reporters tried to press him for an interview, but he refused. Instead, he handed his notebook to Sheriff Denton and said, "There's something you need to know. Something I didn't tell the investigators back then." Inside the notebook were pages of notes, sketches, times, even maps. He had documented sightings. People who claimed to see the bus, or the children, years after the disappearance. Most had been dismissed as delusions or hoaxes. But what stood out was one name, circled multiple times: Devlin Marsh. Sheriff Denton stared at the name. "Is that a relative of Leona?" Elias nodded slowly. "Her brother. Or something like that. He was the one who picked her up that morning. Said her car wouldn't start. But I don't remember her ever saying she had a brother." When asked why he hadn't brought this up before, Elias said something that chilled Denton to the bone. "Because I didn't think he was real." Devlin Marsh. The name hit the room like a dropped glass, sharp, sudden, and followed by silence. Sheriff Denton hadn't heard that name in 30 years, not since the first round of interviews following the disappearance. It had only come up once, and even then, it hadn't seemed important. Just an offhand comment about Leona having a sibling who'd recently returned to town. No one ever saw him. No one could place his face. And when Leona vanished along with the children, that thread of questioning unraveled quickly. But now here it was again, circled in red ink by a man who'd carried the memory of that day like a wound. Denton turned the pages of Elias Monroe's notebook slowly. There were maps sketched by hand, outlines of the old backroads around the ridge, timelines comparing when the bus was last seen to reports of strange lights or distant engine noises in the woods. And near the center, a list of names, not of the missing, but of the people who had claimed to have seen bus 214 after it vanished. The most recent entry was from just 6 years ago. "Saw headlights near Split Pine Hill," it read. "Flickering, then gone. No sound, no tracks, just gone." The handwriting was shaky, scrawled across a torn grocery receipt. Elias had written below it in smaller letters, "We think we bury the past, but sometimes it buries us first." By the time the FBI arrived on scene, the site had become a spectacle. Satellite vans lined the dirt road leading to the ridge, and people from neighboring counties were setting up lawn chairs like it was a 4th of July parade. Sheriff Denton wasn't pleased, but she didn't have the authority to shut it down. The agents, all clean-shaved, suit-wearing, and tight-lipped, took over within hours. They brought scanners, dogs, mobile labs, even a forensic anthropologist from Quantico. They referred to the discovery as Phase 1, but they hadn't read Elias's notebook. They didn't know about Devlin. Not yet. Denton didn't tell them. Not immediately. Something told her to wait. It wasn't that she didn't trust them. It was that she didn't trust this. The whole thing felt wrong. Like the bus didn't just reappear. Like it had been given back. And she didn't want federal boots trampling over something that still breathed. Meanwhile, whispers spread through Briar Glen. The older folks started locking their doors again. Children were kept home from school, even though the bus had been found miles away. The fog grew thicker that week, the kind that blanketed the road by 5 p.m. and didn't lift until mid-morning. A local preacher gave a sermon titled The Lost and the Buried, and warned his congregation that some holes in the ground lead not to hell, but to the things we've chosen to ignore. Most didn't know what he meant, but some, the ones who remembered, left the church that day with a new fear pressed beneath their ribs. At the library, Elias Monroe spent his afternoons by the microfilm reader, scrolling through old newspapers from the early 90s. Sheriff Denton visited him there one evening after dark, walking through the quiet rows of shelves until she found him hunched over the glowing screen, his glasses low on his nose. "I need to know more," she said quietly. "About Devlin." Elias didn't look away from the screen. He came out of nowhere. That's the part people forget. One day, he was just here. No record of him attending the local high school. No driver's license. No job. But he was always around. People said he looked like Leona. Same dark hair, same jawline. But different. Off. Off how? Denton asked. Elias scrolled the microfilm forward, then paused. He never blinked. That's what I remember most. I spoke to him once. Just once. At the grocery store. He was buying rope and batteries. I asked him where he was headed. He said, "Nowhere that'll stay still long enough." Then he just smiled. Sheriff Denton sat with that for a long time. "Did you tell the state troopers back then?" Elias nodded. "They didn't take it seriously. Said I was grieving. Told me Devlin was just a rumor, probably someone passing through. But you don't think so?" Elias finally turned to face her. "No," he said. "I think he was the reason that bus never made it to Cresswell Caverns." Denton leaned back, the chair creaking beneath her. The name still tasted wrong in her mouth. Devlin Marsh, like something that was never meant to be spoken aloud. "I don't think he took the children," Elias added quietly. "I think he followed them." That night, Sheriff Denton retrieved the archived interview tapes from 1993. The ones recorded on cassette and transferred to digital 10 years ago, just in case anyone ever cared enough to look again. She found Leona's last known footage, a staff interview conducted 2 days before the field trip. She looked tired. Her voice trembled slightly. When asked if she was comfortable chaperoning alone, she hesitated. "I'll have help," she said. The investigator asked, "Who?" Leona looked off camera. "My brother's coming to town." A pause. Then, "He doesn't stay long, but he likes caves." The tape ended 30 seconds later. That was all there was. No follow-up. No verification. Just a note in the file. Marsh sibling unconfirmed. No further data. But now, Sheriff Denton couldn't stop picturing it. The bus rumbling through the morning fog, 12 kids laughing, Leona smiling politely in the second row, and a man in a black cap driving them into the woods, whistling quietly, not because he was lost, but because he'd been there before. And maybe, just maybe, because someone had been waiting for them. The forensic team began their internal sweep of the bus at 9 a.m. the following morning. The mist still hung low across the ridge, a curtain of damp breath that seemed to move whenever you turned your back. The yellow shell of bus 214 sat wedged in the shallow basin like a carcass half consumed. Its roof had buckled slightly under the weight of 30 years of earth and time, but the front cabin and aisle remained surprisingly intact. The decision was made to cut the door open with precision tools rather than force the rusted mechanism. Not out of caution for evidence, but because something about the vehicle made everyone uneasy. Forel, the lead forensic anthropologist, took point. Her team moved like surgeons, gloved hands brushing away sediment, collecting spores and fibers. The first thing they noted was the smell. Not rot, not mildew, not even death. It was something sweeter. Faint. Wrong. It smells like sugar, one tech whispered, confused. Like burnt caramel. No one had an answer for that. Inside the bus, the silence was different. It wasn't the absence of noise. It was a kind of pressure, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every surface was coated in a thin, reddish residue. Not blood, not rust, something in between. Forel scraped a sample and labeled it Organic Unknown A. The seats had long since rotted to their metal frames, some twisted at odd angles as though they'd melted and then hardened again. But the floor was untouched. Black rubber, uncracked, preserved like it had been laid yesterday. There were no scuff marks. No signs of children rushing or stumbling or fighting. Just emptiness. Forel turned on her UV scanner and passed it slowly over the aisle. That's when she saw it. Footprints. Dozens of them. Small, bare, overlapping in every direction, glowing faintly under the beam. Not shoe prints. Not socks. Bare feet. Her breath caught. She stepped back and whispered. They weren't wearing shoes. Her assistant stared. Why would they take their shoes off? Forel didn't answer. At the front of the bus, tucked under the dash near the emergency brake, they found the first personal item, a child's bracelet, woven with pink and white beads. It was snapped, broken in half, as though yanked off in a hurry. One of the beads was missing. Beside it lay a Polaroid photo, damp and curled at the edges but still legible. A group of children standing outside Buckhorn Valley Elementary, arms linked, smiling. In the center stood a girl with a bright red coat. Forel slipped it into an evidence sleeve, but not before noting the timestamp scribbled in blue pen on the back. October 11th, 1993, 7:12 a.m. The exact time the bus departed. The strangest discovery, however, was at the very back of the vehicle. Behind the last row of seats, in the narrow space that served as storage, something was tucked beneath a piece of warped paneling. It looked like a folder, sealed in plastic, waterlogged but intact. Forel carefully peeled it open and found inside a stack of worksheets, each marked with the name Caleb Knox. They were spelling assignments, dated 2 weeks before the disappearance. But at the bottom of the last page, scrawled in pencil and barely legible, was a single sentence. He said we can't leave if we make noise. Forel read it twice. Then again. She handed it to the sheriff without a word. When Sheriff Denton held that paper in her hands, something shifted in her chest, like an old bone remembering where it broke. She sat on the hood of her cruiser just beyond the tape line, staring at the woods. They felt closer now. The trees too still, the wind too quiet, as if the forest was watching, listening. She called Elias Monroe and read the sentence to him over the phone. There was a long pause. Then he said, Caleb was the only one who didn't like field trips. He used to fake sick just to avoid them. Denton asked why he went that day. Elias hesitated again. Because Miss Marsh said her brother would be there. And he liked her brother. Said he was funny. Did he ever describe him? Yeah, Elias said. He said Devlin wore a blue coat that smelled like rain. Back at the excavation site, Forel's team began mapping the footprint trail, trying to discern a pattern. But they didn't move toward the windows or the doors. They circled, around and around, in loops, as if the children had been walking in place. Some prints overlapped. Some vanished halfway across the aisle. And all of them, without exception, faced forward. None ran. None turned back. It was as if they had all, together, been looking at something ahead. At the driver's seat, a long streak of something dark had dried along the steering column. Forel tested it. Not blood. not oil. A compound they'd never seen before. Protein-rich, but not human. One of the techs whispered that it smelled like burned almonds. Another said it made his gums ache. No one spoke after that. They worked in silence until sunset, then sealed the bus and left the site under guard. That night, Sheriff Denton sat on her front porch with the old case file spread out on her lap. She flipped through missing persons reports, parent interviews, radio logs. Then she came to the personnel file for Leona Marsh. A line caught her eye. Emergency contact listed as Devlin Marsh. No phone number, no address. Just a name, and the word pending scribbled beside it. She opened her laptop and ran it through the state records database. Nothing. No birth certificate. No driver's license. No death certificate. Just a void. She opened another tab and pulled up the archived staff directory for Buckhorn Valley Elementary. Leona's photo was there, smiling faintly, head tilted. She clicked it. Her employment history, education, volunteer hours, and at the bottom, a handwritten reference from a D. Marsh. It read, Leona has always been good with children. She has a calming voice. They listen to her, even when the world stops. Denton leaned back in her chair and exhaled slowly. The stars above Briar Glen were faint, smudged behind a curtain of slow-moving clouds. Somewhere in the woods, a fox screamed, that high, unnatural sound that always made people think of children. She closed the file, locked it away, because what she was starting to believe wasn't just that the bus had been buried. It was that it had been waiting. The next morning, the town woke to rain. Not the kind that rolls in like a warning, but the steady, unrelenting kind. The kind that fills ditches and swells rivers and seeps into basements no matter how well they're sealed. Sheriff Denton drove to the station in silence, wipers squeaking across the windshield in rhythmic protest. Her head was pounding from the night before. Not from sleep deprivation, but from something else. From weight. She'd spent most of the evening trying to convince herself that the words she'd read in that evidence file were just a child's fear scribbled onto paper. But they didn't feel that way. They felt like a record, a warning, a whispered truth buried beneath all the years of silence. She parked behind the building, climbed the back steps, and opened the side door, expecting the usual. Empty desks, cold coffee, maybe a report or two waiting on her chair. Instead, she found Deputy Harris standing in the doorway of her office, holding a thin manila envelope, face pale. "You need to see this," he said, no greeting. The envelope had been dropped through the after-hours mail slot sometime overnight. No return address, just a single word handwritten across the flap. Watch. Inside was a standard USB drive, plain black, scuffed at the edges. Denton hesitated, then plugged it into the old desktop at the front desk. Not her own terminal. Just in case. The screen flickered. A folder popped open. One file. No title. Just a timestamp. 2023-08-21-0431.mov. She double-clicked it. Grainy footage began to play. The kind you get from a worn security camera with bad night vision. A narrow, tree-lined road. No signage. Just fog and asphalt. For a while, nothing moved. Then, faintly, headlights appeared in the distance. Two orbs of soft gold light, bouncing slightly. As they drew closer, the resolution picked up a shape behind them. A boxy silhouette. Large. Lumbering. Yellow. Her stomach tightened. The camera shook slightly, as if mounted on an old telephone pole. The vehicle slowed as it approached. It was a bus. An old one. The kind with split windshield panes and faded emergency exits. It looked just like Bus 214. Only this footage wasn't from 30 years ago. This was from 4 days earlier. The bus rolled into frame slowly, engine humming low. The image was dark, but the side panel glinted just long enough to show the faint shadow of letters, Briar Glen Unified. The bus passed through the frame, but just before it vanished, the brake lights flickered. It stopped, and for a moment, just a moment, a figure stepped into view. Small, slender, a child, barefoot, wearing something white and loose-fitting. The figure turned toward the camera. Then the screen went black. Denton's breath caught in her throat. Deputy Harris stared at her. "This camera's on County Route 11. That road's been closed since the flood in '08. Who monitors it?" she asked. "No one. It's private land now. Belongs to some telecom company that never finished their tower." Denton clicked pause. Her reflection looked back at her from the black screen. Older. Tired. She couldn't deny it anymore. Whatever they'd uncovered in that basin, it hadn't just been a grave. It was a door. And it wasn't closed. Back at the excavation site, the forensic team was packing up. Forel had ordered a temporary halt. Not because they'd found everything, but because what they'd found no longer made sense. There were no human remains. No signs of natural decomposition. No trace of what had happened to the children after the bus stopped. It was like they'd stepped off the edge of reality. She tried to report it as a cold scene, but the words felt dishonest. In her final notes before leaving the site, she wrote, "This location resists explanation. It is both crime scene and memorial, both absence and echo." As news of the USB footage leaked, the town began to shift. More people came forward, not to report crimes, but to confess memories. A man who worked at the gas station on the outskirts said he saw a boy standing barefoot outside the woods 3 nights ago. Said the kid had pale hair and stared like he was looking through him. A woman from Pine Holler claimed she heard children laughing in her backyard at midnight. When she turned on the porch light, there was no one there, just a red shoelace tied to the fence post. One of the local pastors claimed he had dreams of tunnels and long hallways, voices echoing from just beyond a door he couldn't open. Sheriff Denton wrote down every story. She didn't laugh. She didn't dismiss. Something was waking up in Briar Glen, not in the town, but in its people. The trauma that had been buried was surfacing, but with it came something else. A presence. Meanwhile, the old school building, Buckhorn Valley Elementary, which had been converted into a storage facility after closing in 2002, reported a break-in. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. Just one room was left unlocked, room 6C, the art room, where Leona Marsh used to teach. On the chalkboard, someone had written a sentence in yellow chalk. He said we could come back if we were quiet. It was the same handwriting from Caleb Knox's worksheet. But Caleb Knox had been 10 years old in 1993, and that chalk was still fresh. The call came in at 2:17 a.m., jarring Sheriff Denton awake before her second cup of sleep could settle in. Dispatch said the caller was an elderly man named Lester Cole, who lived off of Briar Creek Road, a winding strip of gravel and timber that had only one mailbox and no reliable cell signal. Lester rarely called the station. In fact, most folks thought he'd gone mute after his wife passed in 2014. But now, his voice was shaky and alive on the line, whispering one sentence that would sit in the pit of Denton's gut for days. "He's on my porch." She didn't ask who. She didn't need to. Something in the tone told her. By the time she reached the property, the sun hadn't yet broken through the hills, and fog still clung low like a spilled secret. Her cruiser headlights swept over the twisted fence posts and up to the sagging porch. Lester stood in the doorway, eyes wide, hands trembling, and sitting cross-legged on the porch boards, calm, still barefoot, was a boy. He looked about 10 years old, dressed in a button-up shirt too thin for the cold and khaki pants stained with clay. His hair was dirty blonde, tangled, his skin pale like paper left too long in the sun, and his eyes, when they met hers, were deep gray. Not frightened, not relieved, just waiting. Sheriff Denton stepped forward slowly. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The boy tilted his head, blinking slowly. "Caleb." The name hit her like a blow. "Caleb Knox?" she asked, not daring to believe it. He nodded once. "Where have you been?" she asked. The boy looked toward the woods behind the house. "Down there." Denton lowered herself to one knee. "Can you tell me what happened? Where the others are?" Caleb's eyes flicked back to hers. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He simply said, "They said I could leave if I stayed quiet." It was the same sentence again, the one from the worksheet. the one from the chalkboard. And now, it came from a mouth that hadn't aged in 30 years. They took him to the hospital, of course. Ran tests, drew blood, checked reflexes and brain activity. But the results only raised more questions. No ID markers. No dental records beyond those from 1993, which matched perfectly. No signs of malnutrition, trauma, or decay. His body was that of a 10-year-old boy. His memories, too. He remembered the field trip, the bus, Miss Marsh, the fog, and then he remembered the door. What kind of door? The nurse had asked gently, brushing a leaf from his collar. A door in the trees, he'd whispered. But it's not always open. They showed him photographs of the missing children, taken from yearbooks and family albums. He pointed to each one with quiet precision, saying their names without hesitation. Even the twins, Noah and Nadine Bowers, who'd only transferred to Buckhorn Valley a month before the trip. They're still there, he said, but they're listening now. For what? The nurse asked. Caleb's voice dropped. For footsteps. He doesn't like footsteps. Meanwhile, Sheriff Denton sat outside the hospital, staring at the skyline while her radio buzzed with static. She didn't want to go back to the station. She didn't want to face the press. She wanted to scream, or run, or climb into her cruiser and drive until the hills disappeared behind her. But she didn't. She sat and she waited, because deep down, she knew what came next. Caleb's return wasn't closure. It was permission. Within 24 hours, the town began to split, not physically, but spiritually. Some saw Caleb as a miracle, proof that the lost could return, that time could be undone. Parents whose children had vanished began arriving at the hospital, hoping, praying, clutching old photos like relics. Others whispered that he wasn't the same, that he was a reflection, a shadow, something shaped like a child but hollow on the inside. One of the nurses said she'd seen him standing at the window at 3 a.m., his breath fogging the glass as he whispered to someone unseen beyond the pane. He's not alone, she said, even when he is. The media circus erupted again. National coverage, camera vans, interview requests. Denton refused them all. She told her deputies to say nothing, to protect Caleb's identity. But then, one morning, Caleb disappeared. No struggle, no sign of forced exit. Just an empty hospital bed, a pile of leaves on the floor, and the words "We were too loud" written in crayon on the wall. This time, they knew better than to chase him. Instead, Denton returned to the excavation site. The bus was still there, but its atmosphere had changed. The air was colder, the forest quieter. Forel, who had returned on her own accord, said the soil around the bus had started to sink again, as if something underneath wanted it covered. "Have you ever heard of a false grave?" she asked Denton quietly. "No. It's when a predator buries its kill but keeps it close. For later." Denton didn't reply. Her eyes were fixed on the tree line. That night, Elias Monroe left a voicemail on Denton's private line. His voice was frantic, breathless. "I remembered something," he said. "A field trip form. Leona didn't fill it out, Devlin did. Signed his name at the bottom. I have it. Meet me." But by the time Denton arrived at Elias's house, the lights were off. His front door was ajar, and in his mailbox, tucked between two flyers, was a single piece of paper folded 4 times. It was the form. At the bottom, a signature. Devlin Marsh. Below it, a sentence in smaller print. "If you hear them walking, close your eyes." Sheriff Denton stared at the folded form on her lap, as if it might catch fire. The ink was faded, but still legible. Devlin Marsh, written in long, looping script. Neat. Composed. Below it, the sentence, "If you hear them walking, close your eyes." It was absurd, and yet it was familiar now. A phrase that had shown up in too many places. Caleb's worksheet, the chalkboard, the crayon on the hospital wall. A warning, but not one meant for the people looking. One meant for the people listening. She tucked the paper into her jacket and stepped into Elias Monroe's home. The screen door creaked as she opened it, its hinges rusted from disuse. The lights were still off. The smell inside was faintly metallic, like pennies left out in the rain. She called his name, once, then twice. No response. Nothing was overturned. No blood. No signs of struggle. Just the faint sound of a ticking clock, a grandfather piece in the corner that hadn't chimed in years. On the kitchen table sat a small stack of books. Local history records. Genealogy logs. Elias had clearly been researching something. She flipped through the top one, Briar Glen, Foundations in Folklore, 1811 to 1929. Inside, a marked page bore a newspaper clipping from 1893. The headline read, "5 children vanish near Moss Hollow, widespread search underway." There was a photo beneath it, blurry, degraded, but unmistakable. A school cart, drawn by horse, seats for children along the side. It was turned over at the base of a tree. The children were never found. Sheriff Denton scanned the page again, heart skipping. The article mentioned a teacher, Margaret Ellison, who had reportedly brought the children to explore limestone ridges south of the bluff. She vanished with them. Eyewitnesses recalled a man seen walking beside the wagon earlier that morning, carrying a satchel and wearing a coat of deep indigo. The name wasn't listed, but someone, likely Elias, had written beside the column in pencil. D. Marsh? She flipped the next few pages. More strange disappearances. Children gone from campsites. A family lost while hiking. Each with a common thread. Fog, caves, and someone tall, pale, and quiet seen in the area beforehand. The last article, dated 1910, made her skin crawl. It was titled, "The Man Who Walks Where Roads Forget." It spoke of a traveler, nameless, ageless, who appeared only when a new path was carved through the trees. He walks alone, the article read. Never eats. Never sleeps. He waits near the water and does not speak unless you speak first. Then he follows. Sheriff Denton closed the book. Something had followed them. Not just the children. The town itself. The next morning, she visited the records office, a dusty room in the back of the courthouse that hadn't seen sunlight in years. She asked for any documents under the name Devlin Marsh, census, property, military, even criminal. The clerk returned with a small folder. Inside, 2 documents, an obituary from 1978 for a Devlin Marsh, age listed as unknown, and a property deed from 1901 for a cabin located near the western bluff, long since condemned. The obituary had no photo, no listed relatives, just a quote. He went back to where the hills remember. Denton drove there herself. The cabin was barely more than bones, collapsed roof, splintered walls, vines swallowing the frame like the forest wanted it hidden again. The air was dense, thick with the smell of wet cedar and something else, something iron-rich and old. She stepped inside cautiously. Dust motes spiraled through shafts of light that broke through holes in the ceiling. In the far corner, beneath a rotted beam, was a trunk. Locked. She pried it open with a crowbar. Inside, a set of hand-bound books, wrapped in what looked like waxed cloth. Journals. The first few pages were dates. Places. Lists of children's names. Some were crossed out. Some had notes beside them. Still speaks too loudly. Not ready. Walks in circles. She flipped further. Drawings. Doors in the woods. Some wide and jagged. Some narrow, almost keyhole-shaped. Beneath one sketch, a sentence in slanted ink. The door will not open unless the silence is absolute. The final journal had only 1 page written on. It read, "The boy returned." He brought something back with him. Now the others hear the footsteps, too. Denton staggered back. Her foot hit a loose floorboard, and something slid across the dust, a stone. No, a bead. Pink and white. Just like the bracelet from the bus. She turned it over in her fingers. A tiny C, etched into one side. Caleb. It was his. But how had it ended up here? She backed out of the cabin, heart pounding. On the drive back, her radio crackled. A voice came through, garbled, breathless. "Sheriff, you need to get to the school. Now." She pulled into the old Buckhorn Valley parking lot 15 minutes later. The deputy was waiting by the doors. "You're not going to believe this," he said, then turned and led her inside. The building had been shuttered for years, turned into a storage site for district records and broken equipment. But someone had been inside. The main hallway walls were covered in chalk drawings. Dozens of them. Stick figures. Children. All facing a large black shape drawn near the back wall. A door. Behind the art room's door, more chalk. But these weren't drawings. They were names. Each child from Bus 214, written in a shaky hand along the walls and ceiling. And one more name repeated in the center of the blackboard, over and over, like a chant. Devlin. 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 Sheriff Denton stared at the name. The hallway was silent. No footsteps. No wind. But deep in her chest, she could feel it. Something had been waiting, and now it was awake. The next morning, Briar Glen felt hollowed out. The streets were quiet, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that warned of absence, as if the town had collectively stopped breathing. Local businesses didn't open. The diner didn't unlock its doors. Mailboxes stood full. The church bells didn't ring. People were staying inside now, not out of superstition, but instinct. They'd seen the reports, heard about Caleb, the missing nurse, the footage, the chalkboard. It wasn't gossip anymore. It was presence. The thing that walked just beyond the trees, that stepped on fallen leaves without ever breaking them. It was here, and it was listening. Sheriff Denton paced the halls of the station with her hands in her pockets and her thoughts running ragged. Devlin Marsh. The name thudded in her head like a heartbeat. There was no official record, no surviving family, just drawings, sightings, children's warnings, and now the cabin, the journals, the bracelet, too many echoes from too many directions, and all of them pointed to one place, the old mouth of the Cresswell Caverns, the original destination of Bus 214. Cresswell had been closed to the public since 2006. A partial cave-in had sealed the back tunnels, and a few hikers had gone missing. Nothing conclusive. Nothing investigated too deeply. Just accidents, they said. Bad rock. But the locals stayed away long before the cave-in. Even when the tours were open, nobody from Briar Glen went in. Something about the cold down there. The way light refused to reach certain corners. The way echoes sometimes came back wrong. Not as copies, but responses. Denton stood in front of the map pinned to her office wall, tracing the road from the bus site to the caverns. It was a straight shot, 15 miles, one main road and 2 service routes. She drew a red line with her finger. The same path the bus had likely taken 30 years ago. Then she circled the place where it had been found, 8 miles off course. Buried. Planted. What if, she muttered, it never reached the caves, but something from the caves reached it. She stepped outside. The sky was pale, overcast, swollen with the weight of weather that hadn't decided what it wanted to do. Fog hugged the ground. It had become part of life now. A second skin for the town. She drove in silence toward Cresswell, tires crunching gravel, the cruiser's radio off. At mile marker 43, the road narrowed. Trees arched overhead. The kind of forest that didn't make room for people. And then, around a bend, the wooden sign appeared, moss-covered but still legible. Cresswell Caverns, established. 1879, the bones of the earth. Denton parked and stepped out. The old ranger station was boarded up, its porch sagging like a collapsed lung. Beyond it, the cave entrance yawned, a gaping wound in the hillside, partially sealed by a rusted iron gate. Vines crept around the edges like fingers. She approached slowly, her boots sinking slightly into the soft, wet ground. The gate wasn't locked. It hung loose on its hinges, swaying faintly in the windless air. She stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately. Her breath plumed in the air. The stone underfoot was slick, worn smooth by time. She clicked on her flashlight and followed the path inward. The deeper she went, the more the air changed, not just colder, but thicker, like it had been exhaled too many times and never refreshed. The walls were etched with graffiti, old tour dates, names of teenagers long since moved away. But deeper in, the walls changed. No more carvings. No signs of human presence. Just drawings. Handprints. In ash. Circles within circles. A tall figure with hollow eyes. And beneath it, rows of children, drawn small in chalky white. All of them facing the figure. All of them with their mouths open, as if singing. Or screaming. She turned a corner, and the tunnel opened into a wider chamber. The old cathedral room, they'd called it. When the tours ran, this was where they turned off all the lights to show the pure dark. But someone had been here since then. Candles sat in a ring on the floor, long burned out, their wax melted into the stone. And in the center of the room, scratched into the ground with something sharp, was a message. You opened the door. Sheriff Denton stood there a long time. Long enough that the silence became unbearable. Not quiet, not peaceful, heavy. She felt her ears ring. Then something moved behind her. Not loudly, just a scrape, like a footstep, like someone standing just beyond the edge of her flashlight beam. She turned sharply, nothing. The tunnel behind her stretched empty, but the air smelled wrong now. Sweet, burnt, the same smell as the bus. She backed out slowly, flashlight shaking. Halfway up the tunnel, her radio hissed to life. A burst of static. Then a voice. A child's voice. We're not supposed to talk. The radio clicked off. Denton ran. Back in town, the fog had thickened. The sun hadn't risen all day. People kept their lights on, even at noon. And in the distance, faint but unmistakable, someone heard a school bus engine echo across the hills. It never appeared, but the sound kept returning. By the time night fell, the fog over Briar Glen had swallowed the hills whole. Streetlights flickered, then dimmed, until the town was lit only by porch lanterns and candles trembling behind thin curtains. The local power station claimed it was a transformer fault, an overload, maybe, or water intrusion, but everyone knew better. This wasn't a technical failure. It was an arrival. That's how it felt, as if something massive had finally stepped all the way through. And no one, not even the skeptics, dared deny that the air had changed. It felt damp in the lungs. It tasted like copper and lavender. Dogs wouldn't bark. Radios wouldn't hold a signal. And no one, not even the boldest children, dared walk outside after dark. At the sheriff's station, the emergency line rang 13 times that night. Reports of movement in backyards. Voices on baby monitors. A tall man seen standing beside a broken road sign, eyes too dark for the porch light to catch. Sheriff Denton didn't bother responding to every call, not because she didn't believe them, but because she did. And the truth was there wasn't much point. Whatever this was, it wasn't afraid of badges. So instead she prepared, not for an arrest, for an entry, the cavern, the bus, the chalk messages, the returned boy. All signs pointed the same direction. The only way out of this was through. So at midnight, Denton suited up, not in uniform, but in old hiking gear and a flashlight clipped to her belt. She packed one thing only, Caleb's original worksheet, the one with the pencil-scrawled warning. She didn't take a weapon. She didn't think it would help. Her cruiser rolled quietly out of town, headlights off, and followed the same road bus 214 had once taken. Not out of symbolism, out of necessity. It was the road that still remembered. At the cavern's mouth, the wind was still, dead still. The trees around it leaned slightly inward now, as if straining to listen. She entered without hesitation. The descent was worse this time. She didn't use her flashlight at first. She let her eyes adjust to the dark, let the stone teach her how to see. The silence wasn't empty here. It pulsed, like breath, like waiting. She moved carefully, following the same corridor she had the day before, but now there were no chalk drawings, no handprints. The walls were blank, clean, as if the cave had swallowed them back. But something else had changed. The corridor didn't end where it should have. Instead, it curved, downward. The angle was unnatural, too steep for erosion, too smooth for mining. And on the floor, in perfect formation, were 12 small footprints. Bare, still wet. She followed them, not because she was brave, because she had no choice. The tunnel spiraled tighter as she descended, the air growing colder, thinner. Then suddenly it opened. Not into a chamber, but into a room, carved perfectly into the rock, like a cathedral built underground. And there, in the center, was the bus. Bus 214. Unburied. Whole. Its paint fresh. Windows intact. Headlights glowing faintly in the dark. Inside, 12 seats were filled. Children sat facing forward, perfectly still. Not bound. Not fearful. Just waiting. Denton's breath caught. She took one step forward. The headlights flickered. And then slowly the driver turned. He wore a coat the color of rain. His skin was pale, hair dark, lips too red. But his eyes were the thing you saw in your dreams before you knew what fear was. Eyes that didn't blink. Eyes that didn't age. Devlin Marsh. He smiled just barely. Then he spoke, for the first time anyone had recorded in 30 years. You came too loud. The children turned in unison. Their faces were the same as they were in 1993. Unchanged. Uniged. But their eyes were gray. All of them. Like Caleb's. As if whatever they'd seen had left its mark. You took one, Denton said, voice steady. Now I want the rest. Devlin tilted his head. They don't want to leave, he said softly. Not anymore. They were made quiet. You made them noisy again. Behind her, something shifted. The rock. It moved. A door. A real door, carved into the stone, began to slide open. Not by mechanics, but by intent. And beyond it was dark. Not absence. Not shadow. Something older. Something vast. Denton stepped between it and the children. You took them, she whispered. No, Devlin said. You gave them to me. For a moment, it was quiet. Then one child stood. A girl, Nadine Bowers. 11 years old. Missing for 3 decades. She looked at Denton with something like sadness. He's not what hurts us, she said softly. It's what we remember. Denton dropped to her knees. You can come home, she whispered. All of you. No, said another voice. Caleb. He was standing beside Devlin now. He let us forget. And now we remember. One by one, the children turned toward the open door. Denton called after them. Pleaded. Begged. But they didn't look back. And one by one, they walked into the dark. Until only Devlin remained. He turned, gave one final look, and stepped into the silence. The door closed. Stone groaned, and bus 214 was empty once more. Dawn broke slowly over Briar Glen, as if the sun itself was reluctant to rise. The fog didn't lift that day. It simply receded, curling at the edges of windows and fence posts like something exhausted but not gone. People woke up to a town changed, though no one could say exactly how. The air felt different, lighter in some places, heavier in others. The wind moved sideways. Dogs who once barked at shadows now simply stared. No one had seen Sheriff Denton since the night before. Her cruiser was found abandoned by the entrance to Cresswell Caverns, the keys still in the ignition. Inside the vehicle, folded neatly on the passenger seat, was a single page of notebook paper. Caleb Knox's worksheet. The warning still visible in faded pencil. He said we can't leave if we make noise. It was damp, the corners curled, but the writing remained. Deputy Harris took over operations at the station. He made the calls, wrote the statements, locked the doors. He told the town that Denton was gone, but not dead, that maybe she had crossed into something none of them could understand, chasing ghosts with the courage most people only dream about. No one argued, because deep down they already knew. The children weren't missing anymore. They were somewhere else, somewhere the town had let exist by looking away, by being quiet. For days, people came to the ridge where the bus had once been unearthed. But the hole was gone now, filled, smoothed over as if it had never been dug in the first place. The earth had taken it back. A soft rise of moss-covered dirt was all that remained. Someone placed 12 small white stones in a circle on the spot. No names, no plaque, just presence. And then there was the tree. An old oak at the edge of the clearing had split down the center, as if struck by lightning, though there'd been no storm. Inside the crack, tucked carefully into the hollow, was a bundle wrapped in fabric. A nurse found it while walking her dog. Inside were the belongings of the missing: a bracelet, a lunchbox, a handful of Polaroids, and a small toy bus carved from wood. On the underside of the toy, burned into the grain with something fine and sharp, was a single sentence: "She came quietly." It spread through town like a whispered sermon. People didn't talk about it much, but some began visiting the tree, leaving things: ribbons, candles, toys, and once, one perfect red coat, folded at the base like an offering. Elias Monroe's house was never reopened. It stood as it was, lights off, doors closed. But every now and then, someone walking past claimed they saw movement through the curtains. A shadow, a flicker, and once a voice, quiet, measured, reciting names like a list remembered in a dream. Caleb was never found again, but stories began. A child seen near Hollow Creek Road, barefoot and gray-eyed. A voice whispering through old baby monitors. Footprints appearing overnight in muddy yards, always small, always alone. One night, Pastor Greaves held a vigil at the chapel. Only 6 people attended, but during his prayer, the candles flickered out all at once. And when they relit them, 12 paper cranes sat folded across the altar. No one saw who placed them. No one dared move them. And still the cave remains. Cresswell Caverns is now fenced off and patrolled, though no one has tried to enter since that night. The state issued a formal declaration: unsafe, unstable, permanently closed. But some say, if you walk far enough along the tree line at night, far enough to lose the road, you can hear the sound of a bus engine deep underground, humming low, as if idling, waiting. Sheriff Mabel Denton was never declared dead. Her name remains etched into the plaque outside the station, and her desk remains untouched. Her radio still sits on the corner, switched to Channel 4, the private frequency she always kept quiet for herself. Deputy Harris leaves it on, just in case. One morning, 6 weeks after her disappearance, the radio crackled. It wasn't static. It was footsteps. Then a voice. Low. Steady. Hers. They're not lost. They just don't want to be found. Then silence. The tape of that broadcast was played once, then locked away. Because Briar Glen no longer asks questions it doesn't want answers to. In time, the fog will roll in again. It always does. And maybe, on some quiet morning, someone will hear that low rumble on the wind. Tires turning on gravel, the hiss of air brakes, the sound of 12 small children returning home, one by one. Or maybe not. Maybe the Rayal story is the one that never ends. The one still being written. In chalk. On walls that no longer stand.